Hi, I'm Sylvia and I work at Taylor Sewing and Quilt Store in Brockville, Ontario. I've worked here for 7 years or so, since 2014, and I've been quilting for just over 15 years. And one of the techniques you learn when you take your initial quilt course is you get all the different techniques, and the one that I found most challenging was the foundation paper piecing, and it falls into the group of, yeah, I've done it, don't want to do it again, until I found this book with the beautiful floor cushions and matching quilts that go with it. It inspired me to want to try it again. So I glanced through the templates at the back, copied them, and did the foundation piecing the same way I was taught in my initial class. Still had a few issues with folding it over and matching the shape, matching the fabric to the shape I wanted to cover. But my first attempt didn't turn out too badly. I think it was made with scraps from a So Kind of Wonderful ruler where you get a lot of offcuts. So I was fighting with the pieces to fit. Then I noticed that a lot of them in the book were more color coordinated, in that the stripes or the fan pieces were all the same color. So I made another one, and it was with leftovers from the quilt that's behind me. Finally, I was asked to teach the class, and I thought, if I'm going to teach the class, I really should read the book. And I should have read the book first time through, because it was an eye-opener. His technique is a little bit different than what I was originally taught, and it made every piece fit and cover each time. So in the book, there are a number of segments. They talk about color selection with Tula Pink, and he has a very good section on the actual construction of your block. Each block is made up of arcs, inner, middle, outer arc, and each arc you can do 3 different combinations of finishing. You can have a solid arc, you can have the fan segment, or you can have the flying geese. So that's already 9 different combinations that you can do. Also, it's constructed in quarters, so each quarter can be a little bit different. And you can add the outer corner to make it a block instead of a circle, and the center circle can be a solid circle or quarters, which makes it easier for sewing all 4 quarters together. So what I have done is, in the very back where all the templates are, all the different templates for all the different blocks, I photocopied these, and they became my master template. I've got a whole wad of templates that I reuse. You take your paper template on your photocopier, or on your copier rather, and you can make the 4 of each that you need for every circle, for every arc of the block. Then you have your foundation paper or your vellum with the 4 of each segment that you need. And from this, you will be doing the foundation piecing and building your arcs. Now, his method, Carl Hensch, I hope I'm saying that right, his method is to trim the 1/4 inch before you sew. And that gives you the guideline of where to place your next piece of fabric. And with the combination of the rectangles and such that he asks you to cut for each different arc, it will fit every time. They're constructed in a particular order, and the numbers on the template tell you the order of sewing. It's not the color order, because in the next arc the order reverses, and that is so that the seam allowances go in opposite directions and they nest nicely, and that's what gives you the nice straight intersection of your pieces. I'm going to demonstrate a few additions to one template to give you an idea, and then I'll do a couple on the flying geese to show you how easy it is. You're going to sew on the printed side of the template, and the solid line is the stitching line. The dotted line, I hope you can see, the dotted line is the cutting line. So I'll go ahead with a few of those. Your first piece, they suggest that you glue on with a bit of fabric glue. Just put a couple of dots on the paper. Oops, I should be doing it on the other side because I'm going to stitch on that side. A couple of dots of glue to hold it. And this piece will go right side up. And before you add your second piece, you're going to trim it. So you flip your template over and fold it along the stitch line between segment 1 and segment 2. So you'll fold it on the stitching line. You'll use add a quarter ruler. Now, he suggests you use an index card up inside there to give it a little more of an edge for the ruler to bump up against. So you add that, trim your piece. Everything's a little cramped here today. So now we have our first segment on, and we're going to add our next one. And what you will do is that we'll go right side down, and your cut edge will line up with the edge that you just trimmed. And once you sew, that will give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to flip it over and go to the machine, and I will stitch from cutting line to cutting line along the first stitching line. There's no need to anchor at either end. Trim. And now you'll just press that over. My iron is still warm. That's my pile of templates. So we'll press that quickly so that it is over. And now, again, before you add your next segment, you will flip your template over, fold it on the next seam line. And this is where vellum is a little bit nicer because you can really see through it. He does suggest not to use just regular paper because it can't stand up to the constant folding and ironing. He also does, what am I doing here? He also suggests that you have some tape, invisible tape handy, because there's a good chance you'll cut your template, as with the other method that we used to use. So now you see I'm trimming off a little bit more, but it's still going to be just a 1/4 inch more than what I need. It's all right. To add my next segment. So now I have this cut line. I'll take my next bit of fabric, pre-cut, and right side down, lined up against that trimmed seam, and stitch again from the other side. So there, now we've got 3 segments on. I think that gives you an idea of how you progress. So once you've done all the fan, you'll end up with a segment that looks like this. All the pieces are on there. It looks a little ratty, but it hasn't been trimmed yet. So when I go to join my segments, I will trim it on the dotted line, either with a pair of scissors or with my rotary cutter with a good blade. I'll do a few segments of the goose because that's a little bit different. I think I may have mentioned that the outer arc is too large for regular paper, so it's in segments, and you would join your segments on the stitching line and make one large template for your outer arc. So now I'm going to start at the opposite end and start with my solid color of the goose. So again, you start on the back. Let's find my, these pieces are cut from a 4-inch square cut in half diagonally, and you'll have twice as many background as you do colors. So you will take your first color, right side up, same process, right side up, covering that first triangle. Now when you flip it over to trim, you're going to trim between C1 and C2. So I'm going to fold the template on the diagonal, crease it, add my ruler, we'll see if that goes, yeah, that works okay, and trim the excess. And when I turn it over to the right side, that gives me a guideline to add the background. And the background piece, this one will go right side down, and you'll take the longest edge of the triangle along the seam you just trimmed. And you place that on there. Now you can pin it if you need to. When you go to your machine, on this particular arc, or on the Flying Geese arc, I found you can stitch on the stitch line out to the cutting line, but when it comes to stitching this straight line, you need to go from the stitch line to the stitch line. Otherwise, it will tear when you fold back the template. You'll see that in the next step. So now I'm going to just stitch this one on. And I'm going to stop at the point of the geese and just do a couple of reverse stitch, just for safety. And then we'll take that off the machine. And again, you press the piece you just stitched on. The iron's not super hot, but it'll do. So now, before I add the other piece of sky, I will go to flip the template over, and this is the next stitch I'm going to seam between C1 and C3. It's C because it's arc C, and the other ones were E because it was arc E. So press that, use your 1/4 inch ruler, and trim. You'll be trimming both pieces. And when you flip it back over, you now have a straight line to add your next piece of sky. So this will go on again. I found if you centered the top point with the top corner, with the corner it's going to, you always had it in the best spot. And again, we'll go flip it over, and I'm going to stitch C3. This is a little bit of flipping. So I'm going to stitch from the outer edge of the cutting line. There's my foot, there we go. Just to the point, a couple of reverse stitches, take it from the machine. And press. After a while, you'll start having this little mantra: trim, stitch, press, trim, stitch, press. A lot of the girls who take my classes kind of go away with little tunes in their head with things I ask them to remember as they go. So here, our next seam is going to be across the top of the goose and 2 skies you've added, and you're going to add your next goose. So we'll flip the template back again along the stitch line, and using your ruler, trim. Now you're going to trim a whole lot off of this one, but it gives you the straight line where you're going to add your next goose. Right side down, line it up and center the top point with the top point. Now this is where you're going to stitch from stitch line to stitch line. So just put your needle down first where you need it, then stitch across. There we go. Now, once you press that one forward, you'll see that you've got a nice point. And you press your goose, and then you would continue on doing exactly the same all the way across. You would trim between C4 and C5, add your sky, trim between C4 and C6, add your next piece of sky, and so on, and you'll build your flying goose arc, and it will look like this when you're done. Now, I joined the two templates before I made this segment so that it's all in one, and the color order matches the color order of my arc, of my fan that goes below it. Now, in the different blocks where you have a flying geese in the center segment and two fans, one top and bottom, all the seam allowances are pressed such that they will nest when you join them together. So this one has been trimmed, so we'll trim this one up quickly using my rotary cutter. I find if you turn your piece as you go, you're actually cutting fairly straight. Just watch out for your fingers. And if you have to stick your tongue out one way or the other, go right ahead. Oh, you're still stuck. Now, in joining one arc to the other, the book does suggest that you leave the paper template on. I have found it easier without the paper. So this edge of this arc is going to be joined to the top edge of this arc. So you feel for the seam allowance and you feel the seam allowance, and they just nest together very nicely like that. And then you would pin it. I like to work from this side. So you would pin that one, then you would get the next one nested up and pin it. Now there'll be a bit of bulk on one side, but as you stitch, it will ease. And if you put the side with the greater amount of fabric down, the feed dogs will help pull that in together. And as I said, I did find it much easier to do without the paper on it. Because I've cut it to my 1/4 inch, I will use my 1/4 inch seam allowance foot to stitch that once I've taken the paper off and pinned it. So once it's pinned, or once it's stitched, you'll have, whoops, that's a whole one. Where did my half one go? A 1/4. You'll see that the seam allowances will tell you which way they want to be pressed. Because of the bulk at these corners of the geese, they want to stay straight, so it's best to press those ones out. When I added the solid arc on the bottom, it was a matter of marking my quarters to match up to the fan segment and then stitch it on. But all these techniques are outlined very nicely in the book, and there's a good section on discussion of color and color choices. And it just really changed how I felt about paper piecing. And I will try this method with other shapes and other patterns. But cutting the 1/4 inch first is what really made the difference. Do you have any questions, Paige? No?
What about the quilt behind you and how you use the extras for the pillow?
Well, when I made this quilt, I watched the video from Jordan Fabrics on their Lone Star quilt, and I adapted it to the number of colors that I had and the arrangement that I wanted to do. I had seen it in a book, and so I cut all my strips and then cut my diagonals for the diamonds, and I had quite a bit left. So then I used the pieces in the same order, but did it from dark to light, light to dark, and around, and used my backing. That's the backing on the quilt. This is all Northcott. Use that nice, I think it's Artisan Spirit. Not sure. No,
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. That's what it is. And the stuffing. Everyone says, "Oh, your pillows are so heavy." The stuffing is leftover batting. When I cut off the edges of a quilt, and you've got those 2 or 3 inch strips that you don't know what to do with, I just, on an afternoon or a half hour, I've got nothing, I'll sit and chop them up and stuff them in a bag, and when I'm ready to make another pillow, I stuff it, make a pillow form out of muslin, stuff it with the batting leftovers, and it's a nice solid nice solid pillow. And it's a floor cushion. My great niece and nephew love to push them around and play stepping stones with them. I have quite a few at home. And then this blue came about from a blue quilt that's over there. I did a curvy log cabin in blue. And again, I had leftovers, and to teach the class that I did by Zoom, which was our first Zoom class last year, I did this one, and the ladies who participated were very happy with how their foundation piecing came out. And one of my other girls in the class talks about FPP and EPP, and now it's FFPP because it's Fearless Foundation Paper Piecing, because it is so easy now, cutting the 1/4 inch before you sew. Now, some of you have already found out that magical step. Good for you, but for us it was a bit of a revelation. Thanks.
What other projects are in the book that you can do with these different blocks?
For each set of pillows, I was only interested in the pillows, but there are quilts. Let's see, where's the one? So, where's my pillow? Well, let's look at this one. This one is called Papyrus, and it goes from blue through to the lightest colors. And in the layout for the quilt, that's another thing. In the layout for the quilt, each block has a number. And if you go back to the back of the book, there's a block index. And each block is laid out with each of the arcs that is required for that pillow or block. So then you'll go back to the template section, find which arc they're referring to, and that's the one that you'll make copies of. Some of the other quilts, they're not necessarily full quilts. That's one that's a Tula one. It's called Fox in the Hole. And yeah, here's the quilt that goes with the one that I demonstrated, but again, they've used half circles, 1/4 circles, and each block is a different arrangement of arcs. There are just half arcs, but each of them has been made into a block using the corner template. Now the corner template is a 1 piece and the reverse of the piece with the seam, and you just flip your seam allowance to opposite the seam allowance there, and you add it like you do the solid arcs, and it comes up to be a perfect square. And the combination of colors that the ladies used when I was teaching was just amazing. There was one that had Mickey Mouse fabric with Minnie and Mickey and bright colors. Another one, the sky was black and her geese were bright pastel colors. It was just amazing. Everybody's color choice made a different kind of quilt. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you get something out of it. By all means, order the book. We will have them in stock. The add a quarter ruler is very handy, and a nice little iron. If you've got a nice little setup, then you're not getting up and down and up and down. And hope you enjoyed this and will be encouraged to try Fearless Foundation Piecing. Thanks. Bye.